Hello, welcome to our final week of Western World Lit, week 13. A few quick announcements to go over here. First of all, the reading for this week. I'm asking you to look at some poetry, some Carpe Diem poetry, and then I made a scan from our book of 4 travel writers I'd like you to take a look at. Please read Columbus, Michel de Montaigne, Hans Staden, and Bartolome de las Casas. I posted, if you look here on Blackboard for this week, I posted 2 lectures, one covering the poetry for this week and another covering the travel writing. So please take a look at those. I also posted links to all the poems, so they're all here, as well as the PDF of the travel writers. You have 2 discussion posts due this week. The first is just a couple questions about some of the Carpe Diem poetry, and the other is a more detailed, again, I'd like you to answer this question in about 300 words. Try to use a quotation from one of the texts. I gave you 2 options this week. One is to focus on Donne's poem To His Mistress Going to Bed, which is up here. And the other is to compare and contrast how 2 of the authors, 2 of the travel writers, regard Indigenous Americans. And then finally, in addition to that, please remember to respond to 2 of your classmates' posts by Friday of this week. And again, that's in reference to this second post, not the study guide. So please read your classmates' responses to this discussion post. The other thing I want to bring to your attention is that I decided to just go ahead and make the final exam live and available now. So you're basically welcome to take it anytime between now and May 5th. So let me explain really quick how you can find it. First of all, it's if you go to the course content page and just scroll all the way to the bottom, you'll see final exam right after week 13, final exam date, Tuesday, May 5th from 11 to 1. That's when our final exam was going to be scheduled. And again, because this is now a take-home quiz, it's just going to be due at 1 p.m. on May 5th. So please keep that date in mind. If you click on it, I have the exam here, but I also posted a PowerPoint review, which I want to walk you through in a moment. And I also posted a Word document of the exam. So what I would encourage you to do, and I say this here, is to please download this and look over the questions. I think you should take the time to kind of look up the answers to these questions. And I make this recommendation just so that, if you're like busy taking this test and then the internet cuts out and then suddenly you lose all your questions, I think you should be able to just kind of go through the test and plug in your answers, have your answers ready. And I say that especially for the passage analyses. I wouldn't want you to be typing, a lengthy response to one of these essay questions and then have the internet crap out on you or have your computer break or something like that. So I think if you can just copy paste your answers for that particular section, that's maybe a better idea. So that's why I posted the Word document here. You can open it, take a look at it. The questions should be posted in the same format on the Word document as they exist in the final exam itself. This is set up exactly like our midterm. There's going to be 10 multiple choice questions, which are worth 4 points each, 10 short answers, which are worth 2 points each. So that gets us to 60 points. And then the last 40 points of the exam are earned with these passage analyses. I'm going to give you a passage from the text, and I want you to tell me, explain how that passage fits into the plot of the work as a whole, and then also explain what kind of themes are being emulated in that, or demonstrated in that passage. So let me walk you through this PowerPoint video really quickly. Again, I explained how the format for the exam works. It's exactly like the midterm. I also remind you about everything I just went over. Due date here, how you can download the exam first. So these are the passages. And to save a little time, I'm not going to read all of these. But this week in your reading, I'd encourage you to pay close attention to the end of Michel de Montaigne's essay of Cannibals, which is where this passage is taken from. Basically, to respond to this, one of the things I should say first, I guess, is on the passage analysis questions, make sure your answers are in paragraph form. Don't just copy the list of bullet points from this PowerPoint. Use complete sentences and provide as much detail as possible if you want full credit. So I am, again, in this PowerPoint, I am making suggestions about things you could talk about because I want to let you know what I'm looking for. But I don't want to just see this kind of copy and pasted into the exam itself. So please make sure you're kind of fleshing out what you're talking about. Put the essay in context for me. Put the quote in context for me in the work that it comes from. But basically, Montaigne's point at the end of this essay, he gets this opportunity to talk to a group of Tupinamba Indians who supposedly practice cannibalism, who have been brought back to France. Montaigne never actually visited Brazil, but he got the chance to meet some indigenous Brazilians at one point, and that's kind of what this essay is about. So he asks them what they find strange about Europe, and he basically describes their answers here. First, they thought it very strange that so many tall men should submit to obey a child. And what he means here is that the king of France at this time actually was a child. So they, again, from their perspective, that seems very strange because in the Tupinamba culture, it's kind of a might makes right type of rule where the most powerful man in their society is the one who's in charge, right? Powerful physically, I guess. And secondly, the other thing they notice is wealth inequality. Just kind of walking through the streets of wherever they are in France, that they noticed there were amongst us men full and crammed with all manner of commodities, whilst in the meantime their haves were begging at their doors. So they see like beggars on the streets, and then they see people coming out of palaces. And they thought it strange that these necessitous haves should be able to suffer so great an inequality and injustice, and that they did not take the others by the throats or set fire to their houses. So if you again, a theme, if you read the rest of Montaigne's essay, his point is basically that he says at one point barbarism is the name for what is not one's own custom. His argument is that Europeans should not be too quick to condemn cannibals for their different cultural practices. He shows how European customs seem strange or different or even savage from a non-Western perspective. I really love this essay. I think it's really interesting, and I think that's kind of the point he's making. But I also recognize this essay, there are parts of it that are very kind of dated and difficult to understand. But I just want to make sure you have a sense of what he's talking about at the end of this essay here. Another passage, this is the very end of the Miller's Tale, where he's kind of summarizing what happens to each character. This is how the Miller ends his tale of Allison, who sleeps with Nicholas despite her jealous husband, and Absalom, who tries to kiss Allison through the window but kisses her ass instead. Nicholas gets his ass burned when he tries to repeat Allison's jest with Absalom, but he gets a hot poker. Alice's husband also breaks his arm when he hears Nicholas cry out for water, right? So some themes you could talk about with this passage might be, again, thinking that this story is actually a great example of a fableau. So you could kind of talk about some of the criteria for being a fableau. What does that mean? Again, it's a story in rhyming couplets that often focuses on these kind of funny and scatological humor. You might also want to talk about how the men are punished for their offenses, because it's kind of listing like what happens to each character, and you can kind of think about maybe whether or not they deserve that. And Allison also seems to kind of get what she wants, as a few people noted in their posts from last week. But also, maybe she has more agency than other women in stories from this time that we've been reading, if you think about her in comparison to maybe some of the characters from Boccaccio. So again, I don't think there's a right answer for how you describe whether or not Allison gets punished, but I think use the text to kind of support whatever it is you want to say about what you think the theme or the story's message here for women is, or about women. This passage comes from the story that Philomena tells on day 5. It's the 8th story from the Decameron that we read. This is the one where Nastagio comes across this knight who kills a woman every Friday in the woods, and then he decides to invite his love to come see this spectacle, and that's what kind of convinces her to marry him. So great was the fear engendered within her by this episode that in order to avoid a similar fate, she converted her enmity into love, right? So that's kind of what's going on in the plot. Nastagio is able to convince the woman to marry him with this spectacle. And you could think about the theme, you could think about it in terms of the frame. The story suggests, like the framing narrative of the Decameron, that women ought to be ruled by men. Women are safe only when they come under the control of a man through marriage. But at the same time, I think there's also a way you could read it where it's suggesting that it presents an anti-patriarchal message, where women are trapped and presented with the option to either marry a man or be killed. And those are kind of your only options if you're a woman. So it's up to you if you want to kind of think of it as a more subversive story, or if you think it's kind of just upholding the status quo. Again, use the text to support your answer there. This passage comes from Quince in A Midsummer Night's Dream. This is in Act 5 when he is introducing the play within the play. And I think we may have talked about this in class, but this passage I enjoy greatly because basically if you read it the way it's punctuated, it kind of suggests that the actor doesn't really know what he's doing. He kind of does a bad job of the play of these actors. This is the prologue to the play within the play, Pyramus and Thisbe. The play of these actors who have never acted before have rehearsed in the woods, and the play which Theseus has selected despite everyone's protests. The play is performed after the wedding of the 3 couples, after the confusion in the woods has been resolved at the end of Act 4. And a couple themes going on here might be meta-theater, which kind of comments on the practice of theater, since it is a play within a play. It's like you get to watch an audience watch a play. And how does that make us think about ourselves as the audience of this play that we're seeing? The punctuation kind of proves that Quince is a bad actor because he doesn't know how to deliver these lines. And the confusing prologue might relate to kind of more structurally in the play the confusion that happens in the woods, where the men are suddenly deciding that they're not in love with the woman they were initially in love with, but now they're in love with this other woman because of the fairy juice that has been introduced. And it might also suggest that some of the chaos and confusion from the woods has kind of penetrated into this space of Athens, which we might think of as a place where there's more kind of control and order. And then finally, the last passage here is from the end of Laustic by Marie de France. Again, the story of the knight who loves his neighbor's wife receives a gift of a dead nightingale from her, which is where we get the name Laustic. After her cruel husband killed it, he preserves it in a small box and carries it with him. And again, the themes here you might talk about in your response. The dead bird seems to represent the woman being imprisoned in an unhappy marriage. It presents the woman as a victim of the established social convention of marriage. It's interesting too, thinking about the fact that Marie de France wrote this. A woman wrote this, which again, very early text. But it's a damsel in distress whose knight in shining armor is there, but doesn't really come to her rescue. So it's kind of playing with that convention a little bit, maybe. And she also can't really be ridiculed because she remains a faithful wife, despite being unhappy and being in love with her neighbor. So I hope this helps you guys. Please feel free to reach out if you have any questions or concerns. But this is pretty much it. So I want to thank you guys for a great semester. and I wish everybody the best of luck with this exam and with your finals and your other classes. Please be well and take care of yourselves. Thank you.